Dear students, greetings of the day. I am Professor Kiran Shende, working with AISSMS College of Hotel Management and Catering Technology. Welcome you all for my first session on cake making. Before I take you to the objectives of today's understanding, let me tell you, cake is the most favorite of all. If you apply the correct technique, if you apply the correct artwork to it, it will give you good results. Now, on that very note, let me take you to the objectives of today's class. At the end of the session, you will be able to understand, number one, what cake making is. Number two, to know the essential and optional ingredients of cake making. To learn different methods of cake making. To know how do you balance a recipe. To understand different types of cakes, followed by faults, remedies, and causes. Before I take you to my first objective of cake making, let us quickly define what a cake is. It is an item of soft, sweet food made from a mixture of fat, flour, eggs, sugar, and other ingredients. Baked, sometimes iced and or decorated, or sometimes it is eaten like that only. Okay, so on that very note, let me take you to the first objective of today's session, that is essential and optional ingredients of cake making. Basically, essential ingredients are only four, without which you cannot make a cake. Number one, refined flour. Number two, sugar. Number three, fat. And number four, eggs. These are the four essential ingredients of any cake making. Whereas if you talk about optional ingredients, salt, milk, baking powder, flavors, and water are the optional ingredients of cake making. Let us take this one by one. Let us understand the functions of these ingredients. First and the foremost, a structure builder. Basically, refined flour is a structure builder without which you really cannot make a cake. It is most primest ingredient of all. It acts as a binding agent and an absorbing agent. It absorbs the moisture. It has the capacity to it. It holds all the other ingredients together and evenly distributes it in the cake mixture. So that is how it acts as its primest ingredient of structure builder. It keeps all the ingredients together. Of course, it has nutritive value because of the carbohydrates present in the flour. It increases the nutritive value of your cake. Number two, sugar. Again, very important element of any cake making. Sugar basically used in couple of formats in cake making. Number one is caster sugar and number two is powdered sugar, which is mostly used in any form of cake. Number one, objective or function. It gives sweetness. It's a sweetener. It helps in getting a softer texture and a good crust color. The ideal golden brown color comes only because of sugar. The sugar caramelizes inside and gives it a characteristic good golden brown color to the crust of a cake. It helps in retaining the moisture. It has the mellowing and tendering capacity, and also it will give you a very good flavor in the cake. So those are the functions of sugar. Fat. Basically, two types of fats are used in cake making: butter and margarine. Mind you, if you use a combination of butter and margarine, your cake will be far more better. The few functions of the fat is, it makes a product tender, number one. Number two, it retains the moisture for a longer period of time. Number three, it improves the shelf life of the cake. Number four, it improves the flavor. Like I said, if you use butter instead of margarine, obviously your cake flavor, flavor will be far more different, far more buttery, far more different than the other fats. It gives softness to your product, and of course the nutrition which is present in the fats or butter will add up to the nutritive value of it. And not only that, but it will also increase the eating quality. You'll feel better when you eat the cake. Most importantly, all these fats has a capacity to hold air during the creaming operation. So that is how, because of the methods which we are going to discuss in the forthcoming slides, that is how your cake becomes light and fluffy. The last compulsory ingredient, number four, eggs. Basically, eggs, like flour, it is also a structure builder. It makes the product moist, improves the color. It helps in achieving a good volume and a better taste. Of course, it has nutrition. It increases the nutritive value. It gives softness to the cake, and the lecithin, which is present in the yolks, acts as an emulsifier. Now, that is how your cake batter looks more velvety when it is in its raw state. Okay, so during the beating operation, air has capacity to entrap a lot of air. You must have seen stiffly beaten egg whites with sugar, which is normally called as meringue. So it has a good capacity to hold air inside. Okay, let me take your attention to some of the optional ingredients. Number one, salt. What is the basic function of salt? It improves the flavor and the taste. If it is more, if your sugar content is more in the formula, so you increase a bit of salt, so it cuts down the excessive sweetness. But most important function of a salt, it enhances the natural flavors of other ingredients. So whenever, in whichever sweet you put salt, the flavors will automatically enhance, because it has the natural tendency to enhance the flavor of other ingredients. The next one is milk. It keeps the cake tender. It helps in retaining the moisture, and it also adds up to the nutritive value of the cake, because milk itself has a lot of nutrition present inside. Uh, the next ingredient is baking powder. Baking powder, basically, it will increase the volume of your product. How it will increase? Because it's a chemical leavener. It will react it will react with the moisture of the cake and produce CO2 gas, and that's how the volume of the cake increases. It improves the product by making it light and tender. So that is the function of baking powder. Flavors, basically, why do we use flavors? Flavors will cut down the unwanted flavor or smell of the raw material. Basically, eggs. It is used to cut down the smell of eggs, and it increases the cake taste and the flavor. The eating quantities basically are increased. So flavors by means of spices, flavor by means of emulsions, flavors by means of oil or essences, anything can be used to cut down the smell of eggs. Water basically is used to combine all the dry ingredients together. It will form a good mass. It helps in maintaining the batter consistency. It will release the CO2 gas when it reacts with the baking powder and forms a vapor. So that's how the volume of your cake is increased. And it, of course, it will give or makes the cake moist, or keep the cake moist for a longer period of time. Okay, on that very note, let us talk about our review number one. Now in this session, I'm going to take 3 reviews. So we are at review number 1. It's a small question which will be displayed in front of you. You have to give the answer for it. So the question which is there in front of you, the first question is, which of the following is not an essential ingredient in cake making? The options are flour, water, butter, eggs. So what do you think? Yes, you think what you think is right. Water is a non-essential ingredient. The next question is, which of the following is an essential ingredient in cake making? The options are baking powder, milk, sugar, and water. Yes, you have guessed it right. Serial number 3, that is sugar, is a compulsory ingredient or an essential ingredient. So on that very note, let us talk about the second objective. Very important whenever you appear for any kind of interviews or any kind of tests. Methods of cake making. Let us understand. 7 in numbers. Number 1, sugar batter, flour batter, blending, boiling, sugar water, all in process. And the last one is foaming method. So there are 7 methods with which you can make a cake. Let us understand all these methods one by one. The first method, and the most common method, which is used in most of the bakeries, that is sugar batter method. Technically, or in other terms, it is also called as creaming method of cake making. What happens? Stage 1, fat and sugar is creamed till it is light and fluffy. What happens in stage 2? Liquids by means of eggs, milk, colors are added to the creamed mixture, followed by fruits and flour is folded. Now this method basically is used for layer cakes, slice cakes, muffins, cupcakes, pound cakes. This is widely used for manufacturing all these cakes. The procedure, I'll show it to you in front of you. Number one, creaming of fat and sugar till it is light and fluffy. So this is how it looks like. You cream it up, you fold up the flour by a method called as cutting and folding, followed by panning the batter. So you're pouring the batter in a prepared tin that is greased and lined or greased and dusted tin. Bake it at 180 degrees Celsius for 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so your creaming method cake is ready. The next method is flour batter method, method number 2. Stage 1, what happens in stage 1? Fat and equal quantity of flour is creamed till it is light and fluffy. Stage 2, eggs and equal quantity of sugar is whisked together, and followed by stage 3, that is combining the stage 1 and the stage 2. What happens in the 4th stage? Add the remaining sugar dissolved in liquid. Maybe it can be milk or it can be water, along with the colors and the flavors, and the remaining flour along with the chemicals by means of soda or by means of baking powder is added to the mixture. The third method is blending method of cake making, wherein the fat, flour, baking powder and salt are whipped together in a planetary mixer till it is light and fluffy. You can even use a hand blender to do this method. In the second stage, sugar, except the eggs, are added to the creamed mixture. Finally, the first stage and the second stage are mixed together. Stage 4, you have to add the eggs and mix till the entire mixture is nice and smooth. This basically is used for high ratio cake, wherein the quantity of sugar is more than the quantity of refined flour. Next method of making is boiled method of cake making. In stage 1, water is heated till the boiling point at 2/3 of the flour and mix it thoroughly. So this you can even resemble like a choux pastry in cake in flour pastry making, wherein you heat up the fat and the water and then finally you add the flour. So it is on the same lines. Eggs along with sugar is mixed to a stiff peak, add the essences and colors to it. Stage 3, mix 1 and 2 gradually. Stage 4 is you fold up the remaining flour along with the chemicals, most suitable for making a citrus flavored classical cake, that is a Madeira cake. Okay, this is most suitable for making that. The next method is sugar water method. Basically, sugar water method, stage 1, has sugar and half the quantity of water is agitated till it is dissolved. Second stage, add the remaining ingredients except the eggs to it. Mix all the ingredients well, agitate them to achieve a good aeration. This entire operation happens in planetary mixer at a very high speed, so that the agitation or the emulsion is formed of water and sugar. Finally, the eggs are added till the mixture is nice, soft and velvety. The next method is most suitable for convenience egg products, or convenience cake products, or convenience packets of cakes, okay, wherein ready mixes which are available in the market nowadays. Stage 1, what happens here? All the ingredients are mixed together except oil, and it is beaten at a slow speed. Speed is eventually increased and to a higher speed to achieve more aeration, and in stage 3, the fats by means of oils or melted butter is added to the creamed mixture. This is most suitable for making eggless cakes from a ready mix packet. Finally, the last method is foaming method. Stage 1, what happens is eggs and sugar is whisked till it is frothy, okay, soft peaks. Stage 2, you add the essences and color, and in the stage 3, you fold up the sieved flour along with baking powder with a cutting and folding method. Ideally, fatless sponge cakes and Genoese sponge cakes are manufactured using this method. Now, if you really compare, only creaming method and foaming methods are most widely used methods in any of the cake shop. What happens in foaming method? Eggs and sugar is whisked till it is ribbon stage is achieved. So once the ribbon stage is achieved, you've cut and fold the flour, followed by pan the batter in a greased and lined mold and bake it at 180 degrees for 15 to 20 minutes. On that note, let us see a video on cake making by Natasha's Kitchen.
Hey everyone, it's Natasha of natasha'skitchen.com, and today I'm going to teach you how to make my favorite European sponge cake. I use this base for so many of my cakes. It's awesome because it takes on moisture really well and it never gets soggy, and it only has 4 ingredients. Yes, wait. You're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, then beat 6 large room temperature eggs on high speed for 1 minute. While the mixer's on, gradually add 1 cup of sugar and continue beating that on high speed for about 8 minutes. While that's going, I'm going to whisk together 1 cup of all-purpose flour and half a teaspoon of baking powder. This is exactly what the eggs and sugar should look like when they're done, thick and fluffy. Now sift the flour mixture into the batter in thirds, folding between each addition. Because this cake really relies on the volume of the eggs, it's super important not to overmix. So you want to mix just until there's no more streaks of flour. And make sure to scrape from the bottom of the bowl to catch any hidden pockets of flour. Now divide the batter evenly between 2 9-inch cake pans. And all I did to prepare these was line the bottoms with parchment paper. I did not grease the sides of the pans. Smooth out the top, and into the oven they go at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. When they're done, they'll be a deep golden color on top. A few minutes after they're out of the oven, you can loosen the cakes from the pans and invert them onto a wire rack. Remove the backing and dun-da-da-dun, you're done. You've got a beautiful sponge cake. All there is to it. You've got 2 very flat, perfect European sponge cakes. Now, once these are at room temperature, you can slice them in half and make a beautiful layered cake. Check out my blog, natasha'skitchen.com, to get some great ideas on how to use this cake. If you guys love this video, give me a thumbs up below. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to see our recipes, and thanks for watching.
Isn't it great, students? So please don't forget to subscribe the channel. The recipes are really nice. On that note, let us come to the second review of today's understanding. I'll show you the question in front of you. You have to guess the answer. Identify this cake making method which is there displayed in front of you. Yes, you have guessed it right. This method is creaming method, that is sugar batter method of cake making. All of you have guessed it right. Very good. Now, let us talk about the next segment of today's understanding is types of cakes. Basically bifurcated into again 2 categories. One is a rich cake and one is a lean cake. So it is all about the quantity of fat in rich and lean cakes. On the other hand, there is also something called as high ratio cakes and low ratio cakes, wherein the difference lies between the amount of sugar. So these pictures which are displayed in front of you, the top one is a low ratio cake and the bottom one with fruits is a high ratio cake. Let us understand what is a rich cake and what is a lean cake. Rich cake basically has more fat, lean cake has less fat. Less fat will incorporate less air in lean cakes, more fat will incorporate more air in the rich cakes. Less leavening agent is required in the rich formula, whereas more leavening agent is required in a lean formula. More liquids is required to avoid the gluten formation in a lean cake, whereas the requirement of liquid is less in the rich cake. Low baking temperature is required for a rich formula, and higher baking temperature is required for a leaner formula. What is high ratio and low ratio cake? Like I said in the beginning, high ratio cake contains more sugar than the flour. Low ratio cake contains equal quantity of flour and sugar or less sugar than the total quantity of flour. Quantity of eggs and milk should be more than the quantity of sugar in a high ratio cake, whereas the quantity of eggs, milk should be equal to the sugar in a low ratio cake. Whereas in a high ratio cake, eggs should be equal or higher than the fat content. Whereas in a low ratio cake, the fat should not exceed the amount of eggs. The shelf life is less of a low ratio cake, whereas the shelf life is more of a high ratio cake. Why? Because sugar is a natural preservative. The next objective is how to do a recipe balancing. Very important for a very good baker or a cake maker. The quality of cake depends upon the quality of ingredient. If you use good quality of ingredients, you get good product. Nice quality, nice product. So that's the bottom line. It is also important to apply a correct technique, correct time, correct temperature, correct storing. All these parameters are also very important for a good recipe balance. In cake making, each ingredient gives a definite function. If improper quantities are used, the product will collapse or the product may vary. So every ingredient has its definite role to play. So you have to know how to use these ingredients correctly. If the quantity of one ingredient is changed, then the quantity of other ingredient should also be changed accordingly to maintain a correct balance. Now in my next slide, you people will clearly understand how these balances created. Okay, liquid sugars, when used, amendments should be made in the moisture content of the formula. So for example, if you're using honey or a liquid glucose for that matter, or any kind of a sugar which is in a liquid format, so you should adjust the moisture accordingly, so reduce the milk accordingly. When sugar is increased, eggs should also be increased because that is required. Salt content may vary 0.8 to 3.0 depending upon the quality or quantity of sugar. So salt should be adjusted according to the quality of sugar. If only yolks are used in the recipe, additional moisture is always required. When only egg whites are using, moisture must be reduced from that cake. And most importantly, whenever you use cocoa powder, because it is a dryer, so it kind of dry up the entire moisture from the cake. So use a little more moisture, so add up a bit of more milk or more water to the formula. Okay, so this is how you have to make adjustments to have a correct recipe. The last segment of today's understanding is faults and causes. Again, cake faults are classified and judged in a couple of ways. They are external faults and internal faults. Let us take them one by one. External fault, basically, number one in that category is if the crust is too dark. And the picture you can see, only the crust is very dark. So what could be the probable reasons for it? So if you must have used more sugar or more milk, or too much of the baking temperature is applied on the cake from the top, too much of or too longer a baking time, or if your quality of ingredients are not correct, so that results in a darker crust. If you have a very small cake, how does it happen? So if your flour is very strong, or if you kind of over mixed the mixture, or if your cake tin is too large and if your mixture is small, or if your batter must have curdled, or you must have over beaten the batter so that there is gluten formation, insufficient moisture and insufficient leavening agents are probable causes for having a too smaller cake. Fault number three, spots on the cake. You must have seen there are white spots on the cake. So how does it come? So if you use too much of sugar, or if you bake it slowly, if your batter is too tight, or if you must have used grain sugar in the recipe, which must not have dissolved completely, and that's how after baking the spots are visible on the cake. And this is very common, sinking of the cake. Technically it is called as M fault. How does it happens is only if you use more baking powder. So what happens is the baking powder at a specific level, it reacts faster. Before everything coagulates, the baking powder will take everything up and then it will collapse because the structure has not formed. Or if you must have more quantity of sugar or more quantity of fat is used, or if your quality of flour is weak, so then also you get a M fault on the cake. The next external fault is cake with a bursted top. Now this is very common. So if you have a stiff batter, if you must have used a strong flour instead of a cake flour, or improper mixing technique, or if your oven is too hot, so as in the picture if you can see, there are cracks which are generated on top of a cake along with a peaked top. So you can see both the faults in a single picture. So how these peaks also comes on top of a cake. If you use a strong flour, or uh, if your batter is very loose, or if you over mix the batter at times, too much of the top heat, insufficient aeration, or insufficient fat content results in insufficient fat, or too much of baking powder if you must have used in the formula. So that also will generate those peaks on top of the cake. The next external fault is if you have crack, and this is very common of the crust which has cracks on top. So why does it happen? So if you must have used a wrong quality of flour, or too much of baking powder in the formula, or if you must have over mixed the formula, uneven baking temperature, less of sugar, and too stiff or too tighter batter will give you cracks on top of the cake. Or too much of batter in the cake tin. So let us say, for example, if your cake tin is small and batter is more, so that also will generate cracks on top of the cake. The next fault is crust too thick. So how does it happen? So if you use too much of sugar, if your temperature is uneven, if you over bake, if you have less liquid and a cooler oven. But at times what happens is if your cake is lying outside after the batter is made for a longer period of time, it forms a crust, and after baking it forms a thicker crust. So that should be avoided. The last segment of today's understanding, that is internal cake faults. Uneven texture. So how these uneven texture comes on top of a cake? The probable reasons are the quality of ingredients, very important, insufficient baking powder or a leavening agent, or if your batter must have curdled, so that has resulted in uneven texture, uneven baking temperature, insufficient quantity of liquid will result in an uneven texture. And the next fault is very common, that is holes or tunnels which are formed in the cake. So how these tunnels are formed? If you have less sugar, if you have improper fat or improper creaming, if you have a very stiff batter, or if you must have added more amount of leavening agent in the batter. So these are the probable reasons. But most importantly, if a pocket of air is entrapped at the time of panning, so what happens is the air entraps and there are tunnels which are formed. So it is very important to tap the cake well before it goes inside the oven for baking. The next internal fault is irregular grain. So how this irregular grain, as you can see in the picture, the grain is really irregular. So how does that happens? If too much sugar is used, if too much baking powder is used, or let us say if your batter has curdled, so that flour, fat and eggs have separated, so that's how these irregular grains happens. Improper mixing technique applied to a cake will result in a irregular grain. Poor flavor, probable reasons are, the most common reasons is you must not have used the flavors to it. So too much of leavening agent if you put, if your product is underbaked, poor quality of flavoring agents, insufficient quantity of salt and other flavors in the formula will result in poor flavor. Even the quality of raw materials matters a lot. If you have to make a good cake, your quality of raw materials has to be really nice and branded. Next internal fault is sinking of fruit. So you must have seen it quite often. This is very common. So the probable reasons is if you must have used a weak flour or uneven mixing of the batter, if you must have aerated the mix too much, uneven sizes of the cut fruits, or fruits must, if you are using the soaked fruits, they must not have been drained properly. Too much of liquid will result in sinking of the fruits. But more importantly, whenever you make any kind of plum cakes or fruit cakes, make sure the soaked fruits are dusted with flour, and then only it is used in the cake, so that will avoid the sinking of fruits. So fruit cake crumbles when it cuts. Why it happens? Because of the quality of flour. If you have less sugar, improper mixing, overbeating, unsoaked fruits used, less of liquid, cutting the cake when it is very hot, too long baking time and temperature are probable reasons for the cake which crumbles after you cut it. This is very common. How your cake becomes dense, depending upon the quality of flour, insufficient quantity of eggs or any other leavening agent, or insufficient quantity of liquids by means of water or by means of milk or any other liquid. If your batter is too loose at the time of panning, so that results in a denser cake. Poor keeping qualities of a cake, how does it happens? Obviously, if you've used a wrong quality of raw material, so your quality of keeping will deteriorate. Insufficient essential ingredients, too much of baking temperature, wrong type of flour if you must have used for it. Okay, now on this very note, we have come down to the last review or last quiz of today's understanding. So the quiz question is, why there are holes or tunnels formed in the cake, and the options are displayed in front of you. Quality of ingredients, pocket of air entrapped, uneven baking, or curdling. So what could be the probable reason? Yes, the probable reason is serial number 2, pocket of air entrapped. The next question is why the cake sinks in the middle, why the M fault comes. Quality of raw material or slow baking, too much of baking powder, or use of grain sugar. Yes, some of you thought it right. It is too much of baking powder. Dear students, for this class of mine, I have used the references from Google Images, the images which can be labeled for reuse. The video was taken from Natasha's kitchen. The link is given in front of you. Thank you very much for patient listening. Dear students, you can answer a short quiz pertaining to this topic on my YouTube channel. Below mentioned is the link for the same, which will be there in the description of YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and appear for the quiz. Thank you very much for patient listening. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.